All right, let's bring in the Australian's chief political correspondent, Geoff Chambers. Geoff, I would love to get your reflection on these Newspoll numbers today and whether you think the perception is starting to cement that Albanese is an inadequate performer and potentially weak on some of these national security issues.
Hi, Sharri. Well, if you have a close look at the Newspoll numbers, we started to see them trend downwards from July, and obviously the voice referendum was a big factor, and the view from many voters that the government had taken their eye off the ball when it came to the cost of living crisis. Obviously, off the back of the voice referendum defeat, a very heavy defeat, we've seen the Prime Minister overseas 4 times consecutively. We've had a 13th rate hike. And we've had this culmination, this bottleneck of issues, particularly around national security. We had the first boat that made landfall last week. We've obviously had those detainees released following the High Court decision. So there's this big bottleneck, and it feels like the government's disorganised. They don't have a theme. And I think worryingly, the Prime Minister's only been up for a press conference in the suburbs of Sydney once since he got home from APEC, which was last Thursday. And we've got Parliament back here today. And it just seems like the Prime Minister and his team are trying to work out a way forward. And the way forward is probably going to look like MyEFO in a couple of weeks' time, the mid-year budget update, which is tracking towards a surplus. We've also got the response to the migration review. So the government's eyeing off some of these areas to try and hone their messaging around the cost of living and housing crises. But they just can't seem to get any clear air. And Peter Dutton seems to really be hitting his straps and hitting his lines well, and seems to really claim authority when we're talking about these security issues. Yeah,
and confidence growing as a leader. Now today, Geoff, Andrew Clennell on Sky News revealed that the federal government was secretly trying to secure a deal with the US State Department to resettle the child sex offender who's referred to as NZYQ a month before he won his High Court battle that, as we know, triggered the release of hundreds, 140 at least, criminals onto our streets. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neil was allegedly asking for all avenues to be exposed and no stone left unturned to get this criminal detainee, this child sex offender, out of the country. This according to documents filed with the High Court. Geoff, does this expose some contradictions in Labor's argument?
Well, I think their argument has just been so confused. It's hard to get a clear answer on so many of these really sensitive issues that seem to be popping up for the government. It's clear as day that going back months towards June, the government had a very strong understanding that the High Court would be ruling the way that it did ultimately rule. And we'd been expecting that judgment to come out in February. Thankfully, we're going to see that judgment released in full tomorrow. So what that's going to do is going to see a flurry of activity in terms of legislation. We're only slated to sit this week, the Senate next week, and the House was only due to sit one day next Thursday. It's now looking increasingly likely that they're going to have to resolve this matter ASAP. Now, in terms of the affidavits and what's come out in terms of evidence of Claire O'Neil's office and her department and trying to find a third country to send this child rapist, it's quite extraordinary because it really does contradict what they've said publicly in relation to where this landed, which was a complete mess last couple of weeks.
Now, Geoff, finally, Home Affairs Secretary Michael Peo has now been removed from his job. This is after leaked text messages allegedly saw him collude with lobbyists and political power brokers to gain influence. At least this is what the government is claiming. Others say it's just usual Canberra gossip. Michael Peo was someone who was tough on national security as the head of the Home Affairs Department. Do you think the government's made the right call here?
Well, firstly, I think it's pretty clear that the government were out to get Mike Peo. They dismantled his department. They watered down his authority and responsibilities. And there has been accusations that they were behind some sort of conspiracy. In saying all that, obviously, Mike Pezzullo's text messages were extraordinary. The fact that they were leaked and released, extraordinary in themselves. So it got to a point where he had to go, but there are questions over losing someone of his deep experience, particularly in this national security space.